Democracy depends on a free press. Please support our independent journalism at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Ukraine has agreed to a Trump administration proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia as the United States resumes military assistance and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. In exchange, Ukraine has agreed to sign a deal granting U.S. access to Ukraine's oil, natural gas, and mineral resources as soon as possible. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly video address to Ukrainians that he had accepted the deal following talks in Saudi Arabia.
During today's talks, the American side proposed taking a first step forward, establishing a full ceasefire for 30 days. Not just stopping missiles, drones, and bombs, not just ensuring security in the Black Sea, but implementing a complete ceasefire along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal. We see it as a positive and are ready to take this step.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he would press Moscow to agree to the deal, adding, quote, "The ball is now in their court." Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russian officials are scrutinizing publicly released statements about the ceasefire proposal and did not rule out a phone call between Putin and Trump in the coming days. Overnight, Russia launched another wave of drone and missile attacks on Ukraine. One woman was killed, 9 wounded in a Russian strike on Kryvyi Rih, while in the port city of Odessa, 4 Syrian sailors were killed when a Russian ballistic missile struck a vessel loading wheat for export to Algeria. Israel's military has stepped up attacks on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 8 people over the past 24 hours, despite the ongoing ceasefire agreement. Among the dead are a Palestinian girl who was shot and killed by Israeli forces near Deir al-Balah, and 4 Palestinians killed in an airstrike near an Israeli checkpoint in central Gaza. This is the father of one of the victims.
Did we end the war or not? We don't know. Sometimes they say the first phase of the ceasefire has been extended, and sometimes they say the Israelis are not accepting the deal. We cannot say anything other than, may God take revenge on those who caused this.
With Israel's total blockade of food, fuel, and humanitarian aid to Gaza now in its 12th day, the Gaza Bakers Union reports 6 of the territory's 22 remaining bakeries shut down after they ran out of cooking gas. On Tuesday, the charity MSF, Doctors Without Borders, strongly condemned the Israeli-imposed siege on the Gaza Strip, writing, quote, "Israeli authorities are yet again normalizing the use of aid as a negotiation tool. This is outrageous. Humanitarian aid should never be used as a bargaining chip in war," they said. On Tuesday, Israeli forces arrested dozens of people in the occupied West Bank, killing 4 people during raids around the city of Jenin. Among the victims is 58-year-old grandmother Faiza Ibrahim Abu Ghali, who was shot and killed when Israeli soldiers raided her home. Her 7-year-old grandson was reportedly among family members detained, then later released by Israeli forces. 14 members of Congress have signed a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem demanding the release of recent Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil, a permanent resident of the U.S. who was arrested by immigration authorities for helping organize campus protests in solidarity with Palestinians. The 14 lawmakers, all Democrats, write, quote, "Khalil's constitutional rights have been violated. He's been denied meaningful access to counsel and any visitation from his family. This is absolutely unacceptable and illegal," the letter said. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt argued Secretary of State Marco Rubio has broad authority under the Cold War-era Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952 to declare someone deportable.
The administration believes that it needs to charge a green card holder with a crime to be eligible for deportation.
Well, in fact, Secretary Rubio reserves the right to revoke the visa of Mahmoud Khalil.
Khalil's attorneys are set to face off today in a New York court with Trump officials who want him deported. Khalil, who is being held at an ICE jail in Jena, Louisiana, will not be present at his hearing. On Tuesday, at least a dozen people were arrested in New York City as hundreds gathered to demand his release. Protests in solidarity with Khalil have spread to campuses nationwide. This is Graham Blair, a political science professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where hundreds rallied on Tuesday.
Students are rightly scared, and I'm scared, frankly, because not only is the Trump White House deciding to target peaceful protesters because of their views about the war in Gaza and the complicity of our university in funding it, but they are being helped by university administrators around the country.
The House of Representatives has approved a short-term spending bill to keep the government funded through the end of September. One Democrat voted with 216 Republicans to approve the bill, which looks to slash $13 billion in non-military spending while boosting funds for veterans' health care and the Pentagon. Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries condemned the spending bill, saying it, quote, rips away life-sustaining health care and retirement benefits from everyday Americans.
It's all part of a broader scheme to pass massive tax cuts for billionaire donors, the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and then to stick working-class Americans with the bill. This entire scheme. And as Democrats, we want no part of it.
The bill now moves to the Senate, where it would need the support of at least 7 members of the Democratic caucus to pass. Without a continuing resolution, the government's poised to run out of money by the end of the day on Friday. The Department of Education has announced plans to fire an additional 1,300 workers, effectively cutting the agency's workforce in half since President Trump took office. Newly confirmed Education Secretary Linda McMahon, the billionaire former professional wrestling promoter, says the cuts show her commitment to efficiency and accountability. The National Teachers Union, the National Education Association, condemned the cuts, writing in a statement, quote, gutting the Department of Education will send class sizes soaring, cut job training programs, make higher education more expensive and out of reach for middle-class families, take away special education services for students with disabilities, and gut student civil rights protections, unquote. The European Union has responded swiftly after President Trump's 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports went into effect at midnight. The EU said it would impose counter tariffs on over $28 billion of U.S. goods starting in April. Trump's new tariffs also drew fire from Australia, though Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said his government would hold off for now on imposing reciprocal tariffs. On Tuesday, Trump backed down from threats to further increase U.S. tariffs on Canada by up to 50% and kept tariffs at the 25% rate after leaders of Ontario province suspended plans to raise rates on electricity sold to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. Trump's escalated trade war rattled markets again on Tuesday, with the S&P 500 and NASDAQ indices posting their biggest one-day drop in over 2 years. On Tuesday, House Republicans added language to the House spending bill that effectively revokes Congress's ability to undo Trump's tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China anytime this year. We'll have more on this story after headlines. A House subcommittee hearing abruptly ended Tuesday after Texas Republican Congressmember Keith Self intentionally misgendered Democratic Congressmember Sarah McBride, who's the first transgender person to be elected to Congress, by introducing her as Mr. As McBride delivered her remarks, Democratic Congressmember Bill Keating interrupted, demanding Self to reintroduce McBride. This was their exchange.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Keating, also wonderful.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your introduction again, please?
Yes, we have set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply...
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America? Please.
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency?
Congressmember Self then adjourned the hearing and continued his transphobic attacks, writing on X, quote, "It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female," referring to an executive order signed by President Trump on his first day in office. Here in New York, more than 2,000 prison guards who joined a wildcat strike have been fired for failing to return to work by a Monday morning deadline set by an agreement between state officials and the guards union reached this weekend. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed an executive order Tuesday banning the fired prison guards from future law enforcement and other civil service jobs in New York. The illegal strike led to dozens of state prisons to be placed on lockdown, with incarcerated people decrying worsening conditions inside. At least 9 prisoners died during the strike, including 22-year-old Messiah Nantwi, whose death is being investigated by a special prosecutor. 15 corrections employees were also placed on leave after witnesses said Nantwi was fatally beaten by a group of prison officers. As part of the agreement to end the strike, some prohibitions in New York's Halt Solitary Act, which stands for Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement, were suspended. The law is meant to protect incarcerated people from being subjected to indefinite use of solitary confinement and was at the center of the wildcat strike led by prison guards who've long opposed the measure. A Texas appeals court has blocked the execution of David Wood just 2 days before he's set to be put to death by lethal injection. This is a major victory for the 67-year-old who has for decades maintained he was wrongfully convicted in the murders of 6 girls and young women in the El Paso area in 1987. Wood's lawyers have presented new evidence and have pleaded the court to allow for DNA testing that could prove his innocence. In Louisiana, a federal judge has temporarily halted the execution of Jesse Hoffman, Jr., who is scheduled to be put to death next week using nitrogen gas. Hoffman's execution would have been the first to take place in Louisiana in 15 years. Hoffman's attorneys argued the planned use of nitrogen hypoxia, which would involve placing an industrial full-face mask on Hoffman, would violate the Constitution's 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And in related news, South Carolina death row prisoner Brad Keith Sigmon was executed by firing squad Friday. This was South Carolina's first ever use of that execution method and the first firing squad execution in the United States in 15 years. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.